Anna, we've just had a general election. We've got a new Labour government who've got a huge mandate, I think 174-seat majority. They led the campaign on clean energy mission, which was mission number 2 behind growing the economy. So what does this mean for us, for our sector? And this 2030 target about decarbonising the grid by 2030, I mean, is this achievable?
It's really exciting to see the targets that Labour have set and really the prominence of clean energy and investment in renewables that have been a cornerstone of their campaign. And I think it's not just that, it's also the mission to grow the economy, unlock productivity. And I think for us as a sector, it's just looking at how those two can go hand in hand. That's really important. In terms of the 2030 target, it's certainly very ambitious, but it's definitely achievable. And I think what we now need to see is this Labour government with a very big majority going in from day one and really thinking about how can we maximise deployment of key technologies. And we're not just talking offshore and onshore wind here, but we're also talking tidal, we're talking green hydrogen and storage, and really all the key technologies we need to ensure that the future energy system is going to work and be as affordable as possible. But we also need to create a framework to attract as much private investment into this. We already know that the transition is going to be mainly delivered by private investment, but we now need to see some levers put in place to ensure that we can attract it at speed.
And getting the institutions working faster, surely. But I mean, that we've already seen action this week, just effectively day 2 of the government. Onshore wind ban lifted after 9 years and 20 days since it was put in place. What exactly has been said and what's going to happen next?
It's really exciting to see the ban lifted, and it's definitely something that we as a sector have been asking for a really long time. We know that onshore wind is cheaper, it's really relatively easy to install and can be deployed much quicker. So it's really good to see that announcement being made as quickly as it has been. In terms of what's actually been announced, there have been changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, and a lot of people will have heard a lot of talk about those 2 footnotes that effectively made it quite difficult for onshore wind to be deployed in England, given the level of consent that had to be secured. So those footnotes are now gone. What we now need to see is, in addition to that, thinking about how we can restart the industry. As you said, it's been 9 years. It's a pretty long gap. We can't just expect the change to start getting the investment mobilized. So what we'd like to see now is the setup of an onshore wind task force that really brings together industry leaders from developers, from the supply chain, and from around different parts of the sector to think about what other levers do we need to see in place and how can we get that investment in. The appetite is there. Let's remember how much deployment we have in Scotland and the potential we have in places like Wales. It's now important to ensure that we get this right across the UK. And I think apart from that, we also need to see a clear target for onshore wind. What we've been asking for is 30 gigawatts by 2030. And with the levels of deployment that we're already seeing, that's certainly doable. But also a focus on how we can attract that supply chain investment and ensure that we can do so in a timely way.
And just in some ways, brilliant to see action so quickly after the election on what has been a long-standing issue. Talking about sort of institutions I mentioned before, one of the big elements of the manifesto is the setup of GB Energy, which is to be a state-owned energy company. We haven't seen much detail on that. What do you expect to see and how's this going to work?
I think everyone's really looking for an announcement fairly quickly on exactly what Labour want to see GB Energy delivering. As you said, it's we know the tagline, but we now need to see the details announced fairly quickly. If we want GB Energy to be set up within the first year and actually start making an impact, we need to see those announcements fairly quickly. So outlining a more detailed vision is the first step. In addition to that, Labour also needs to be clear about how the role of GB Energy will evolve. We've recently published a report that we've commissioned from Public First that talks about the role of GB Energy and how that could develop over time. In the initial stage, we see it as playing a key role in supporting the deployment of some technologies like solar, like onshore wind. As we've talked about before, they're quick to deliver, and the polling from Public First shows that if you actually have an institution like GB Energy engaging in community consultations, that really increases the community's support for those types of projects. But then also GB Energy needs to build its expertise in a range of other technologies. So, buying minority stakes in certain types of projects, entering joint ventures with the private sector is something that they can do fairly quickly and start gaining that expertise. I think beyond that, we also should see it playing a more active role in supporting deployment of technologies like floating offshore wind, energy storage, maybe something around how it can support supply chain procurement for grid projects as well. So really all of those sectors of the energy system where we need to see more investment much more quickly.
But crucially, there's plenty of capital out there. It's about crowding in investment rather than crowding it out. So it's got to be designed right. It's got to make sure that it doesn't, distract investors from what we've been doing pretty well in the UK up to now.
Absolutely.
Talking about investors, the big decision that's going to come to the new Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, pretty soon, within the next couple of weeks, is about Allocation Round 6, this year's energy auction or renewable energy auction. To stick to the manifesto commitments that they have made, we're going to need to see a big auction, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's really important that we see a successful Allocation Round 6, and especially we all remember that Allocation Round 5 didn't procure any offshore wind whatsoever. So I think it's really important now to send that strong market signal that we're not going into a boom and bust cycle. We're going to see a consistent pipeline, and each year is going to be about maximizing that deployment. So one thing that we'd like to see fairly quickly is an uplift on the budget, because with the budget that we have right now, we could only procure a very small chunk of the pipeline that's available. We have just over 10 gigawatts of only offshore wind available to bid into Allocation Round 6. And with the budget that's been announced right now, we could procure somewhere around 4 and 5. But actually, we'd like to see something a bit closer to 10 because we need to make up lost ground from last year. But I think beyond announcing that budget uplift, we also want to see a range of measures from the new government on how we can secure greater volumes of renewables at each auction, and how we can create that certainty year on year. And there are a range of measures that they can take to ensure that the parameters of the auctions are better designed. So right now we're seeing reference prices and load factors that lead to an inefficient use of the budget every year. Those could be reformed fairly quickly and actually enable us to unlock much more investment. There's also something about giving more flexibility in terms of delivery years to enable more projects to be built and for them to reach financial investment decision more quickly. And I think over time, we'd also like to look at the allocation methodology and see a consultation on that to see whether it's still fit for purpose and whether it enables us to deploy as much as we could.
And a crucial auction for floating offshore wind as well. We need to see the market sort of kick-started now. If we want to keep up with the international competition, there's a bunch of projects there which are ready. We need to see some investment flow in this crucial emerging market, particularly given the industrial ambitions of this government in terms of, growing jobs and economic development.
Absolutely. And I think just getting more projects over the line to ensure that we can see those costs coming down is going to be really important. Actually, I'd like to pick up on a question for you, Dan, because just before the election, we had put out our industrial growth plan, which was a really ambitious piece of work. And it was really looking at the offshore wind supply chain and what's the UK's unique value proposition in that space. Also, just before the election, we had a range of policies from the previous government on supply and demand measures to accelerate supply chain investment. So I'd like to turn to you now to ask, what do we need to see next? What would you like to see from this new government to ensure that we can build the supply chain that we need in this country?
Well, when I read the Labour manifesto, I was drawn in particular to obviously the energy chapter, which was, the clean energy mission. But the other part that I thought was really, really important was the emphasis around industrial strategy within the economic growth part of the manifesto. So industrial strategy, I think, is absolutely necessary in our sector because it's really about bringing together the industrial policies of a department like DBT and the energy policies that come from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So you've got to get those things working in tandem. And to do that, I think there are a couple of important policies that were being developed that we need to see followed through. So the first of which is the so-called Sustainable Industry Rewards. Labour have promised something called a British Jobs Bonus. This is an idea of, actually providing additional stimulation to companies that invest in renewable energy and create, factory jobs, supply chain jobs as well. But we've argued for a number of years to move away from a price-only auction to move to an auction which recognises the value that is created, and this is so-called non-price factors, which is the sustainable industry rewards, which should give developers a benefit for bringing additional value. That's a policy which is on the table. It's in the Secretary of State's red box, and we would like to see that come progressed in its current form, more or less. But crucially, long-term industrial strategy, I want to make an offer to the government to say, we as an industry can be one of the first sectors, because we've written our industrial growth plan, that offshore wind can be one of the first sectors to write a formal sector-specific, place-based industrial strategy together with the government and bring that to life. We're ready to go. We've got a great story to tell. We know that the total sector could potentially be worth 92 billion to the UK economy by 2050. So it's a huge opportunity, and we've got to really just start to mobilize on that, because the window of opportunity to sort of strike into some of those big investments is quite narrow. We need to move now, in not even in this parliament, but in the first half of this parliament, to really unlock those investments. Blade factories, port investments, fabrication investments, cables. These are the types of things that we really want to see built in the UK, where we have long-term competitive advantage and build the industries of the future on the back of that. So that's got to be the mission with this new government.
Thank you, Dan. Loads of exciting stuff.
Thank you, Anna.